What if I told you that your thoughts, your beliefs, even the words that you use to describe the world around you aren't really your own? That from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, your mind is being shaped, sculpted, and multiplied by forces you can't even see. That democracy itself, this sacred idea of a free-thinking public making rational decisions, is nothing more than a carefully manufactured illusion. This isn't some crackpot conspiracy theory, this is reality. This is propaganda. And it's everywhere. It's in politics, it's in business, in education, and the worst part, you don't even know what's happening to you. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We're diving deep into propaganda, the public mind in the making, and what I've been inspired by is this book by that title by Edward Bernays, the man who literally wrote the book on mass influence. We'll break down how Donald Trump mastered propaganda, not just in politics, but in business, because make no mistake, selling an idea is no different to selling a brand. We'll expose how universities have become propaganda machines, churning out ideological soldiers instead of free thinkers. And most importantly, we'll uncover how you can sort of fight back with this, even if it's an individual sort of mental fight. Because propaganda isn't something you can escape, it's something you must learn to recognize or risk becoming just another mindless follower in the herd. Welcome to the Sam Powell Podcast. Let's begin. We live in a world where we like to believe our thoughts are our own, that our opinions are shaped by reason, research, and experience, that when we take a stance on politics, on business, on society, we do so because we have arrived at the truth through independent thinking. But what if it's an illusion? What if the reality is far more unsettling? What if, without even realizing it, our opinions have been carefully guided, subtly shaped, engineered by forces we don't even see? That is the power of propaganda. And to understand what propaganda really is, we need to go beyond the cliches, beyond the dystopian imaginary of government control and state-run media, because the most effective propaganda isn't forced on you.
What?
It's the kind you're willing to accept, because the best propaganda doesn't feel like propaganda. And that brings us to today's question. Well, what actually is propaganda? For most people, what we think propaganda is, when we hear the word propaganda, we immediately think of one thing: government control. They think of Nazi Germany, of Soviet Russia, of the totalitarian states flooding their citizens with lies, rewriting history, erasing facts. They think of war posters, of bold red letters screaming, obey, consume, conform. They imagine Orwell's 1984, a world where truth is dictated by the state, where history is erased and rewritten on command. And while, yes, that is propaganda, that's just the most obvious form of it, the kind you can see, the kind you can point out and say that's manipulation. But the far more dangerous kind, the kind that exists in a democracy, the kind that doesn't look like propaganda at all, to understand this, we need to go back to nearly 100 years to a man named Edward Bernays. Bernays was heavily inspired by his uncle Sigmund Freud. Pretty cool fact there. And so it puts a little bit of context around like who is Edward Bernays and what is the perspective he comes from. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Sigmund Freud's work or his view of psychology, he believed that the mind was like a house, or the psyche was like a house. But in this house, in which there are several floors and there are many rooms in there was only, say, one light, or there was one candle in one of the rooms, and that was the conscious mind. And all of these other rooms were considered to be the subconscious. But it didn't mean that the goings on in these other rooms that were in the dark, that weren't readily available to us, that we understood completely, didn't have an impact on us. So in that respect, or maybe keeping that in mind, that is the context of which Bernays is considering how we participate in propaganda ourselves, how propaganda has an impact on us. It has an impact on us in this more subconscious way, and it feeds into the subconscious part, and so we don't actually realize the impact it's having on us. So in that regard, let me read to you how Edward Bernays defines it. And I'm going to read directly from the book here. So, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Let me repeat that. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the masses. He goes further saying, Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Let's let that sink in. The real rulers of society aren't the ones you elect. They aren't the ones standing on podiums, giving speeches. They're the ones behind the scenes, shaping what you believe before you even realize you believe it. Propaganda in democracy, it's not a bug, it's not a glitch, but a feature of it. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Bernays wasn't condemning propaganda when he wrote this book. He wasn't sounding the alarm saying, hey, beware, you're being controlled. No, he was defending it. So, because in his mind, propaganda wasn't a threat to democracy, it was a necessary function of it. He believed that in a world where the average person doesn't have time to deeply understand every political, economical, or social issue, someone has to guide them. Someone has to tell them what to believe. Let me read another quote here for you. If we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, it is not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it. To Bernays, the answer was yes. And he wasn't alone in thinking this. The ruling class, governments, corporations, universities, the media have always understood this. How propaganda works in everyday life, let's bring this into the modern world. Propaganda isn't just used by governments, it's used by everyone in power. Corporations use it to sell you products you don't need. Politicians use this to make you hate the other side. Universities use it to create ideological conformity. The media uses it to shape what you see as truth. And the trick is to make you believe that you came to the conclusions on your own. Bernays understood that if you try to force ideas onto people, they resist. But if you can't make them feel like they arrived at those ideas naturally, if you can make them believe it was their choice, then the control becomes invisible. This is why propaganda is most powerful when you don't recognize it's propaganda. Are your beliefs truly your own? So let me ask you something. Why do you wear the brands you wear? Why do you believe what you believe about history, about politics, about culture? Why do you support the causes you support? Are these truly your thoughts? Or were they given to you? Because if Bernays is right, if the public mind is constantly being shaped, then the question is no longer whether you've been influenced by propaganda. The question is rather, how much have you been influenced? And, more importantly, who benefits from what you believe? This is why understanding propaganda is so important. Because whether you realize it or not, you are participating in it. And in the next part of this podcast, we're going to look at someone who understood this better than most. Someone who didn't just use propaganda, but someone who truly mastered it. His name? Donald Trump. Few figures in modern history have divided public opinion like he has. To his supporters, he's a truth teller, a warrior against the establishment, the only man willing to stand up for the forgotten Americans. To his critics, he's a master manipulator, a salesman spinning lies, a demagogue weaponizing division for personal gain. But regardless of where you stand, there is one thing you cannot deny. Donald Trump is a master of propaganda. Not the old school government-controlled kind, not the kind that requires censorship, secrecy, or outright deception. No. Trump's propaganda is different. It's raw, it's relentless, and most importantly, it works. Because Trump didn't just use propaganda, he became propaganda. And to understand why, we have to go back before politics, before The Apprentice, before the rallies and the Twitter storms, to the world that made him, the world of business. Trump's career didn't start in Washington, it started in Manhattan real estate. But he wasn't just another developer, he was a brand. And what was he branding? Branding isn't just propaganda with better marketing. And Edward Bernays understood this long before Trump entered the public eye. In his book, he wrote, let me just get this one out again. The only difference between propaganda and education really isn't the point of view. The advocacy of what we believe is in education. The advocacy of what we do not believe is in propaganda. Trump understood this instinctively. He didn't sell buildings, he sold power. A Trump Tower wasn't just real estate, it was a statement. Trump Casino wasn't just a place to gamble, it was a symbol of winning. And when Trump became the host of The Apprentice, well, he wasn't just on TV. He engineered an entire generation to believe he was the ultimate businessman. The Apprentice wasn't just about entertainment, it was propaganda. And by the time he announced his presidential campaign, millions of Americans already believed in the myth. Trump doesn't lose. Trump is the smartest guy in the room. Trump knows how to make deals. It didn't matter if these things were true. It only mattered if they felt true. Because in politics, just like in business, perception is everything. So how did he apply this to his political campaign? When Trump launched his 2016 campaign, political analysts dismissed him. They said he wasn't serious. They said he didn't have a real plan. They said he would burn out in weeks. But Trump, he wasn't playing by the standard rules. While other candidates ran traditional campaigns, policy speeches, focus groups, consultant-approved sound bites, Trump ran his campaign like a business launch. And this is where the media made their biggest mistake. They thought they were exposing him. They thought they were tearing him down, but every attack, every headline, every scandal only made him stronger. Because Trump wasn't playing by the rules of politics, he was playing by the rules of propaganda. Here's how he did it. First, he used repetition as a weapon. So I'm going to pull up another quote here from the book. The important thing is that it is universal and continuous, and it's the sum total. It is regimenting the public mind every bit as much as an army regiments the bodies of its soldiers. Translation, if you say something enough times, people start to believe it. Trump mastered this. He turned short, simple phrases into psychological triggers. Make America great again. Fake news. Build the wall. Crooked Hillary. Sleepy Joe. These weren't just slogans. They were mental programming. By repeating them endlessly at rallies, in interviews, on social media, Trump embedded them into the public consciousness. The second thing he did was controlling the narrative through outrage. Now, another quote from Bernie here. The minority has discovered a powerful help in influencing majorities. It has been found possible so to mold the minds of the masses that they will throw their newly gained strength in the desired direction. Translation, if you can control what people are talking about, you control what they think. Trump weaponized this better than anyone. He knew the media couldn't resist a scandal, so he created them on purpose. Every time the media attacked him, they were giving him free publicity. And even when the coverage was negative, it didn't matter, because in the world of propaganda, attention is power. Think about this. When Trump called illegal immigrants rapists and criminals, the media covered it non-stop. But what happened? It reinforced his tough on immigration stance to his base. When Trump mocked his opponents with nicknames, the media laughed at it, but those nicknames stuck. When Trump said the 2020 election was stolen, the media fact-checked it to death, but in doing so, they kept the narrative alive. This is why Trump's recent rallies in 2012 continued to dominate headlines, and even when he wasn't sitting president. When he said that Biden's America was a communist hellhole, the media played the clip over and over. When he called for mass deportations in 2025, it sparked this national outrage, but it also fired up his base. When he suggested he'd be a dictator only on day one, the media exploited with hysteria, but his supporters loved it. That wasn't accidental. This was textbook propaganda. The third thing Trump did, creating an in-group versus an out-group dynamic. One of Bernays' most important insights was this, and I'm going to bring it up from the book again. The group mind does not think in the strict sense of the word. In making up its mind, it relies upon cliches, past experiences, and emotional impulses. Trump exploited this perfectly. He didn't just run against the Democrats, he ran against the elites, the media, the deep state, globalists, career politicians, big tech. He didn't just ask for votes. He gave his supporters an identity. And once people felt like they are a part of a movement, they become loyal beyond reason. That's why his rallies feel more like religious revivals than political events. That's why his supporters believe the attacks on him are actually attacks on them. That's why they don't just support Trump, they defend him, because Trump didn't just sell policies, he sold belonging. And that is propaganda at its most powerful. So just some final thoughts on this. Trump didn't invent propaganda. Every president, every leader, every movement has used it. But Trump understood something most politicians never do. That in the modern world, it's not the best policies that win, it's the best story. And Trump is a storyteller. One of the best storytellers. But if Trump represents right-wing propaganda, well, what about the left? Because if you think Trump was the only one playing this game, you're missing half the picture. In this next section of the podcast, well, I'd like to expose or talk to an institution that has taken propaganda to a whole new level on the shape that, and it's one that shapes entire generations. And I'm talking about universities and what they're doing. It might even be more dangerous than what Trump's been doing. For decades, universities have been revered as temples of knowledge, bastions of free thought, where students are encouraged to question authority, challenge ideas, and engage in open debates. They were supposed to be the places where young minds were sharpened, refined, and tested against competing worldviews. But today, universities have become something else entirely. Instead of centres for learning, they've become factories for ideological conformity. Instead of producing independent thinkers, they're manufacturing activists. And the worst part, it's all happening under the illusion of education. So, to understand how this transformation occurred, we need to go back again to Edward Bernays. So the man who predicted this nearly a century ago. So let me bring this out in his book again. Modern education is not simply a matter of rote learning. It is the deliberate conscious training of the young in the principles which the ruling group in any society regards as desirable. Let's read that again. Education is not about truth. It's about training people to accept the principles that those in the power deem desirable. And what happens when one ideology takes control of the education system? They don't just influence what people think. They influence how people think. And that is exactly what has happened in universities today in the Western world. There has been a radical left takeover of universities. There was a time when academia valued diverse perspective, when ideas stood or fell on the strength of argument and evidence. But over time, something has changed. The radical left realized something that Bernays has already explained. And I've got another quote for us here. If we understand the mechanism and the motives of the group mind, it is not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it. The answer was yes. And universities were the perfect place to do it. And here's how they did it. So, step 1. Take control of the professorship studies. Show that the left-leaning professors outnumber conservatives by massive margins. In many social sciences and humanities departments, there is little to no ideological diversity. If students are only exposed to one worldview, the worldview becomes their reality. By controlling the faculty, universities shape an entire generation's perception of the world. 2. Reframe critical thinking as attack on morality. The purpose of education used to be questioning ideas. Today, questioning the dominant ideology is seen as dangerous, offensive, even hateful. Universities replaced logic and debate with emotional reasoning and moral absolutism. If you dare to disagree, you're not just wrong, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a fascist, you're on the wrong side of history. And once people fear social punishment for thinking critically, they stop thinking critically altogether. Step 3. Use language to control thought. Bernays understood that language is one of the most powerful tools of propaganda, and universities have weaponized language to redefine reality. Suddenly, words like oppression, privilege, systemic, microaggression dominate every discussion. By controlling the language, they control how students think. Because once you control the words people use, you control the way they see the world. Step 4, encourage self-censorship. The most effective propaganda doesn't require external censorship. It convinces people to censor themselves. Students fear speaking their minds, afraid they'll be ostracized or labeled. They begin to police their own thoughts, second-guessing every opinion. Soon, only one ideology is expressed, creating the illusion that is universally accepted. And once that illusion is created, dissent disappears. Because who wants to be the only one questioning the truth? Here are some real-world examples for you. So, and some real-world examples of what happens when propaganda replaces the education. Now, the first one I've got here, Evergreen State College, and we'll call this one the collapse of the debate. So in 2017, a progressive professor named Brett Weinstein, if you're not familiar with this guy, I would highly recommend searching him and his brother up, Eric Weinstein. They've both got some really classic podcasts with, first like Brett and Jordan Peterson on the Joe Rogan podcast. That is an epic one. I think Sam Harris may have even been in that episode as well, or it might have just been those two arguing as well. Also on Chris Williamson's podcast, really epic as well. Absolutely love these guys. And Brett Weinstein also wrote an epic book with his wife as well about the modern day hunter-gatherer. I cannot recommend that one enough. Sorry, but back to Evergreen State College. Brett Weinstein. So Brett Weinstein, he was forced to flee his own college, not because he said something racist, not because he engaged in hate speech, but because he refused to participate in a racially segregated day of absence. When he challenged the idea that white students and faculty should be forced off campus for a day, he was mobbed by students, labelled as a white supremacist, and had to leave for his own safety. A liberal professor in a liberal college supporting liberal values, now being devoured by the institution he was participating in. This is what happens when a university stops being a place of learning and becomes a place of ideological indoctrination. The second one, the story of Jordan Peterson, from professor to political exile. Another high-profile victim of university propaganda is Jordan Peterson. So Peterson is a clinical psychologist, a professor at the University of Toronto, or was once a respected academic. But everything changed when he refused to comply with Canada's Bill C-16, a law that compelled speech by forcing the use of certain gender pronouns. He wasn't anti-transgender. He wasn't pushing hate speech. He was raising concerns about government overreach and free speech. But in the world of modern universities, disagreeing with the radical left is unforgivable. Students protested his lectures, activists labelled him a bigot. The university pressured him to conform, and when he refused to back down, he was pushed out of academia altogether. A tenured professor, a respected scholar, forced out of the system for not adhering to this ideological orthodoxy. That's not education. That's propaganda enforcement. This similar thing you've seen then also in the US, in the UK, in Australia. Conservative speakers being deplatformed, shouted down, or outright banned from campuses. Professors who challenged leftist ideologies losing their jobs or being investigated. Students who expressed the wrong opinions being socially ostracized, ridiculed, and silenced. Universities no longer encouraged debate. They enforced conformity. And if you step out of line, you're punished. And so, why does this matter? This isn't just about universities. This is about the future of our culture, our politics, and our society. Because today's university students are tomorrow's politicians, journalists, lawyers, business leaders, policymakers. And if entire generations are being trained to accept one worldview as an absolute truth, then democracy itself is at risk. And Bernays warned us about this. And I've got another quote here for us. The mind of the people is made up for them. Their desires and beliefs are scientifically developed by propaganda. And that is exactly what the universities are doing today. They're not creating thinkers. They are engineering beliefs. They're not producing intellectuals. They're manufacturing activists, ideologically possessed activists. And the scariest part of all this, Most students don't even realize it's happening to them. So just before I crack on with the next part of this podcast, we've been exposed to how Trump has mastered propaganda on the right. And we've now exposed how universities have mastered propaganda on the left. But if you think this is where it ends, you're wrong. Because another key element of propaganda is happening in your pocket, your hip pocket. So in this next section here, I want to chat more about how corporations use social media, the entertainment industry works to shape your reality. Because propaganda doesn't just exist in the campaign speeches or the classroom lectures, it's in your pocket, it's in your social media feed, it's in the movies you watch, the news you consume, the brands you buy, the influencers you follow, and the most terrifying part of it, you participate in this willingly. Because modern propaganda doesn't force itself on you, it seduces you. It plays to your desires, your fears, your identity, your sense of belonging. And in doing so, it controls you without you even realizing it. So, how are corporations using propaganda to shape society now? So Edward Bernays wasn't just the father of political propaganda, he was also the architect of modern corporate marketing. So in his book, he wrote, "Big businesses must use propaganda because it is the only way to produce and distribute efficiently the goods which it has to offer." And let's be clear, this is not an attack on business. Bernays wasn't condemning corporations for manipulating the masses. He was simply revealing the reality of the system. If you want to sell a product, you don't sell the product itself. You sell a feeling. You sell a lifestyle. You sell an identity. And once a brand can make you associate their product with your sense of self, they own you. So let's break this down and with some real world examples. Let's consider some luxury brands and that power of exclusivity they create. So let's think of Gucci. Gucci doesn't sell handbags. Gucci sells status. A Gucci handbag isn't about functionality, it's about exclusivity. It's a symbol of power, of wealth, of belonging to an elite class. And when you buy it, well, you aren't just buying a leather and gold plating, you're buying what it says about you. You're buying into a narrative and a carefully crafted story that tells the world, I'm successful, I'm important, I'm above the rest. And that's not an accident. That is propaganda. And it works. So now let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum. Virtue signaling through branding. The Patagonia illusion. So think about Patagonia. Patagonia doesn't sell clothes. Patagonia sells virtue. They sell the idea that by wearing the brand, you are an environmentalist, a minimalist, an anti-capitalist, despite the fact they're literally $1 billion corporation. See how this works? It's not about what you're buying, it's about what buying it makes you feel about yourself. Patagonia markets to your morals. Gucci markets to your ego. Either way, you are being manipulated into an identity that benefits them. Just like Bernays engineered women smoking as a symbol of feminism, modern brands engineer buying a symbol of identity. And once your identity is tied to a product, you stop questioning it. You defend it. Because attacking the product feels like an attack on you. That is propaganda at its most effective. So, corporate propaganda doesn't just stop with branding, it extends into the media itself. And if you think the media exists to inform you, think again. And Bernays puts it quite bluntly in his book. The media by which special pleaders transmit their messages to the public include all means which read the public mind. In other words, the media doesn't tell you the truth. The media tells you a version of the truth that benefits those in control. The best way to control people, keep them divided. So if you look around, everything, politics, race, gender, economics, entertainment has become hyper polarized. The right wing and the left wing are locked in a battle of absolute moral certainty. Each side is convinced that the other side is evil, dangerous, and an existential threat. And do you think this has just happened organically? No. It was engineered because a divided population is easier to control. If people are constantly fighting each other, they aren't fighting the real power structures. And the media, they fuel the division because outrage gets clicks. A headline that says both sides have good ideas will get ignored. A headline that says the other side wants to destroy you will go viral. The media doesn't care about truth. They care about your engagement. And the best way to keep you engaged, keep you angry, keep you scared, keep you emotionally invested. Because once you're emotionally invested, you stop thinking critically. And that's when propaganda wins. Now we arrive at the final boss of modern propaganda, social media. Now this seems a little bit sarcastic, or we'll say not sarcastic, hypocritical that I'm sharing this with you over social media, but I think this goes hand in hand with what Edward Bernays says about propaganda, that we all willingly participate in isn't inherently evil in its own right. It's just a mechanism of how we share information and engage as a society. But if you thought propaganda was powerful when it came to for governments and universities and corporations, imagine what happens when AI algorithms are controlling what you see, what you believe, and how you behave. Bernays could have never predicted this part. So, because in his day, propaganda still required human effort. And if you're wondering about in his day, he wrote this book in 1928. That might put a little bit of interesting perspective on the things he was sharing and how relevant that still is today. So, what is going on today? It happens automatically. The moment you open your phone, you're being fed a personalized, algorithm-driven stream of propaganda. If you like left-wing posts, the algorithm feeds you with more left-wing content. If you like right-wing posts, the algorithm feeds you more right-wing content. You click on something controversial, the algorithm bombards you with more controversy. And before you know it, you've been radicalized. Not because you chose to be, but because the system knows that radicalization equals engagement. And engagement equals profit. You are the product. Here's the brutal truth of it. You think you are in control. But the second you step into social media platform, you become the product. Your emotions, your biases, your fears, your insecurities. They are all data points that are sold to advertisers, political campaigns, and corporate interests who use them to manipulate you even further. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is how the system works. And unless you are actively aware of it, you are being engineered into submission. So, just some final thoughts before this sort of next part of the podcast. We've spoken about propaganda is unavoidable. We've seen how Trump has used it to build momentum. We've seen how universities use it to indoctrinate students. And now we've just had a chat about how corporations, media, and social media create a matrix of control. So now we're sort of left with one final question. What can we do about it? Because the solution is not to escape propaganda. That's impossible. The solution is to recognize it. So in this final sort of moment, I want to chat about how you can sort of break this cycle, how you can reclaim this ability to think for yourself, because that's sort of the only way to beat this system, is to sort of see into the system, to recognize the herd mentality, to have that existential break and shift out of it and sort of gain back that authenticity in yourself. We arrive at the most important question of all: what can we do about it? Because let's be clear, you cannot escape propaganda. It is everywhere. We participate in it. It's in the words we use, it's in the brands we buy, it's in the causes we support, it's in the headlines we read. You cannot opt out. But what you can do is learn to recognize it. you can become aware of it, and once you see the system, you can stop being controlled by it. So today, we're going to break it down. How do you reclaim your mind? How do you think for yourself in a world that is constantly trying to think for you? Let's talk about it. So the step one you might take, accept that you've been indoctrinated. And this is the hardest part, because no one wants to admit they've been manipulated. But the truth is, you have. I have. We all have. From the moment you were born, your mind was shaped by the propaganda of your environment, your parents' beliefs, your teachers' worldviews, the media you consumed, the country you grew up in. Every opinion you hold today, whether about politics, morality, success, or culture, is the result of the narratives you've been exposed to. And the only way to break free of it is to acknowledge that it exists. The mind of the people is made up for them. Their desires and their beliefs are scientifically developed by propaganda. That's another Bernays quote for you. So I want to give you a philosophical perspective here. And if you've ever read Plato's Allegory of the Cave, you already understand this, but there's some pretty fantastic YouTube videos which visualize this. I can recommend you looking up for yourself. But Plato describes prisoners chained in a cave since birth. All they see are the shadows on the wall projected by objects behind them. To them, the shadows are reality. But what happens when one of the prisoners is freed? He steps outside the cave and he sees the real world. Not just shadows, but actual people, trees and sunlight. And when he returns to the cave to tell the others, they don't believe him because the shadows feel more real to them than reality itself. And that's us. The cave is propaganda, and most people never leave it. But once you recognize that your worldview has been shaped for you, you take your first step towards mental freedom. Step 2, identify the emotional triggers being used against you. Bernays understood that propaganda does not persuade with facts, it persuades with emotions. So if you want to break free, you need to start recognizing emotional triggers in media, politics, and advertising. And here's what to watch out for. First, fear-based manipulation. When a headline tells you something is an existential crisis, step back. Ask yourself, is this really true? Or is it designed to make me panic? Fear-based propaganda exists to make you act first and think later. Here's an example. Climate change activists say that the world will end in 10 years. Right-wing media says illegal migration is destroying the country. Public health officials use fear to push compliance without discussion. Who benefits from your fear? 2, the illusion of moral absolutes. When the media frames something as pure good versus pure evil, be skeptical. Most issues are nuanced, but propaganda makes them black and white. If you feel emotionally enraged by a piece of content, ask yourself, am I being manipulated into tribal thinking? Here's an example. The Bud Light controversy. Boycotts erupted because people weren't told why they should be outraged, just that they should be. The Russia-Ukraine war coverage. All nuance is erased, but making one side an absolute villain and the other a pure hero. Heroes versus villain narratives. Number 3. Propaganda simplifies the world into good guys and bad guys. Donald Trump versus the establishment, the woke left versus the oppressors, democracy versus fascism. Ask yourself who benefits from believing this narrative. Step 3, expose yourself to opposing viewpoints. One of the most effective propaganda tactics that are controlling what information people are exposed to. And social media algorithms do this better than anything Bernays could have imagined. He's got another quote for us here. We are dominated by a relatively small number of persons who pull the wires which control the public mind. So, we want to break out of the bubble. If you're left-wing, start reading right-wing news. If you're right-wing, start reading left-wing news. If you're convinced you're right about something, read the best argument against your position. The goal isn't to agree with everything. And what's the worst consequence out of this? You read something, it doesn't even change your view, but it even bolsters your opinion. It makes you more aware of the real information, the truth behind something. So, but the goal still here is to understand what the other side believes and understand why they believe that. Because the moment you refuse to engage with different perspectives, you've become a victim of propaganda. Step 4. Take control of your focus. One of the biggest tricks of propaganda is not just controlling how you think, but controlling what you think about. Why do certain stories go viral while others disappear overnight? This is agenda-setting propaganda. Another quote I've got for you. The significant revolution of modern times is not industrial or economic or political, but the revolution is the manipulation of the masses. Now, I want to give another example for us that was in the past couple of years. Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial. While the entire world was watching this celebrity trial, what were we not paying attention to? Massive inflation, new government surveillance laws, global power shifts. You weren't supposed to focus on these things, because if you focus on distractions, you don't challenge real power. Step number 5, always ask who benefits. At the end of the day, propaganda is always about power. So whenever you come across a narrative that demands your loyalty, your outrage, your obedience, ask yourself, if a politician tells you something is an emergency, who gains power from the crisis? If the media pushes a fear-based narrative, who profits from the panic? If a corporation champions a social justice cause, are they doing it because they care or because it's profitable? The moment you start asking the question, propaganda starts losing its grip on you. So you can't escape propaganda, but you can learn to recognize it. Once you've recognized it, you stop being a pawn in someone else's game. You either control your own mind or someone else, they're going to do it for you. So my final call to you, start questioning everything, because the moment you do, you are no longer a victim of propaganda. You're free. And that changes everything. Now, I don't want this to just be a one-way conversation. I want to hear from you. So tell me, where do you see propaganda just having the biggest impact at the moment on your life in society? Have you realized recently, after a fact, that you've been manipulated and you've been able to sort of forsake this really old belief that you held so strongly? So look, I want to hear your thoughts. Share it with me in the comments. DM me directly. Let's get this conversation going, because the more we discuss it, the more we learn from each other, the more people wake the fuck up. So that means it becomes harder for those that are in power to control us. For those of you that have listened all the way through, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I always find it very pleasurable to share the things that I read, and share maybe the more obscure books that I read as well, and the obscure knowledge that I'm able to share as well. So thank you very much. Give it a like if you've enjoyed the conversation. If you didn't, leave a comment. Let me know why. Cheers. See you on the next one.